as everyone's kind of getting situated, most of you all know me, but for those that don't, I'm Luke Sudo and I'm the Partnership Associate Director at CTAC. We're really excited to be here today with Holistic Underground and Reimagine, both incredible partners in our work. As a lot of you all know, equity has been at the center of CTAC and a huge part of our commitments work. We've been actively transforming advanced illness care through the creation of our equity task force, as well as a lot of new changes within both our organization and also our members. This is a really important moment for us today collectively as a coalition to come together and really reimagine justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in all of our organizations. And we couldn't have done this without our critical partners today, including Reimagine. They're a really close partner of ours. They're a nonprofit organization that draws on the arts, design, medicine, and spirituality to transform taboo cultural attitudes around serious illness and death to address the inequities surrounding how we live and die. And through their unique bottom-up approach to social change, they have created the largest convenings at this intersection in the country, hosting citywide festivals and educational experiences like this one that really open up new pathways for transformation. And most recently, in the last year and a half, they've partnered with the nonprofit Holistic Underground. They provide training and consulting around diversity and inclusion to support visionary organizations. And Holistic Underground is particularly interested in supporting social movements like the one Reimagine has been working on to foster in this space. So together, Holistic Underground and Reimagine have developed a new training, which is our program today. And we're so excited that they've tailored their work for the CTAC community and staff. And we're here today to present one of their foundational workshops for CTAC members. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce Brad Wolf, who's the founder and executive director of Reimagine.
Thank you so much, Luke. It's so nice to be here. Thank you also to John Royals from CTAC and to Reverend Pitts. I also want to thank the Harmon Foundation today for your support. And I want to also say, I'm Brad. I'm as Luke mentioned, the executive director of Reimagine. And yes, our mission is to help really all people face the hard parts of life and transform those experiences into opportunities for growth and for impact, both on an individual and on a collective level. And I'm grateful today to be joined by my colleague Derek Hosberg and our friends at Holistic Underground, Mazen and Raquel, who you'll hear from later. And so, yes, we are reimagining Jedi here together today in your organization. The end. That is how we are starting. The end, it's something that I've thought a lot about myself personally as the grandson of Auschwitz survivors. It's been on my mind since I was a young person, and it's affected my life and my work. And I know it's affected all of your work. It's something that we all share in common. We care to transform how we think about the end, but we also recognize that the way that we end our lives and endings in general, they have the power to shape where we are now, all the way through the end. Today, I want to talk to you about a concept to frame this up called designing with the end in mind, or what's known as backwards design. This means to start with a clear understanding of your destination. It means to know where you're going so that you better understand where you are right now, so that the steps you take are always moving in that right direction. And so this concept of backwards design that I'd like to introduce to you is actually comes out of education and a theory around curriculum design. So in our educators, as we know, historically started out by thinking about how do I plan the next lesson? What topics do I want to teach? And as the semester would go on, at that point, they would start designing their tests, the way that they would measure a student's performance, and then think about the results they were trying to achieve. Backwards design reverses that and thinks about beginning with identifying the desired results. If we know what we're shooting for, then we can design the curriculum to match the outcomes that we'd like to see in the world. So how does that apply to advanced illness and death? This is something that Reimagine has been thinking a lot about since our origin. And we've seen similarly that we get caught up as a culture, rightfully so, in the emotions that come out of advanced illness and death, the taboos, the sense of fear, the confusion, the isolation, and the suffering that are engendered in advanced illness and death. But we don't often take the time to design with the end in mind. And what happens if we do? If we start shifting and doing this backwards design approach, we see that the outcomes we're actually shooting for together are beautiful. They're acceptance instead of taboo, love, knowledge, community, what it means to live fully. This is the work. And if we shoot for those, what can happen? That's led Reimagine to create a statement with the end in mind. It's our vision for the world, a world where all people can embrace life fully from this moment through the end and collectively contribute to a just and to a compassionate society. That's the world that we want to live in. And so we believe to do that, we have to start by reimagining serious illness, loss, and mortality. And from there, what Reimagine, our theory of change is that we want to create gateway experiences that meet people where they are and pull them into this conversation. And then once they're pulled in, and then we can shift them toward growth and action. And this whole endeavor is built on a foundation. It needs to be on a foundation of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And if we do this, we can then transform ourselves and our culture and our entire world, really. And so with that approach in mind, designing with the end, Reimagine has created festivals that Luke alluded to, and the festivals elicit those different emotional states that we're designing for. You can see here the celebration, the art that comes out of addressing these topics from lenses of spirituality, medicine, the arts, bringing different voices together. As we've shifted in the online world, we've had the ability to listen to folks from all kinds of different communities as well. The Black community, we've had events with the Latin community, the Latinx community, the LGBTQ community, the Asian American community. And when we listen to the voices that have come out, thousands of events that we've created during the pandemic and helped spark, tens of thousands of people coming to talk about what it means to live and die well, what we've seen is there is an inextricable link that we need to acknowledge, that all of us are facing together. It's that the work that we're doing is not just in advanced illness, death, and grief. It also must be focused on injustice, inequity, and exclusion. These forces are inextricably intertwined in terms of the results that take place in this world. So this is our challenge. But what we've also seen is that these two elements actually share so much in common. The same taboos that we've talked about, the idea of taboo and fear and confusion and isolation and suffering, they also come out of the injustice and the inequity and exclusion. So therefore, by working on these things together, we actually have an opportunity, a big opportunity to change our culture at its core, where these two collide. But when we think about injustice, inequity, and exclusion, those are things that we can point out. We're getting better as a culture at identifying, oh, that's injustice, or that's inequity, or that's exclusion. But let's take that backwards design approach. If we were to design with the end in mind and thinking about this, the question then becomes not what is injustice, but what is justice? What is equity? What is diversity? What is inclusion? Do we know them when we see them? And that's what we want to practice here today and introduce to all of you, to think about what are the identified desired results that we want when we focus on Jedi. And with that, I am so excited to introduce our Reimagine partners, Mazen Jamal and Raquel. Both of you have really shaped Reimagine's vision of Jedi. and been able to help support our work in shifting the way we think about this and the way that we think about shifting the social movement that we're all building together here. And so I'm excited to hear and have you share with everyone what it means to design with the end in mind around Jedi. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and bring up Mazen.
Thanks, Brad. Really felt what you shared. And I know we all are. I can just feel the whole space just kind of, yeah. There is a necessity for us to create a space, a courageous space to have these conversations. And we've loved working with you all, and we've loved working with other hospice organizations, healthcare workers, because the courage it takes to face the end of life, to face serious and advanced illness, that's the kind of courage it takes to have the conversations that we want to be having, the conversations that will change our world, change our society, and create justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So in that sense, we are in very good company. So glad to be partnering with CTAC and all of you. And before we dive in, I actually thought it would be great for us to take a little moment to check in with ourselves. So I'm going to invite everyone to join me for a brief 2-minute little meditation moment. Call it a meditation, call it a, centering, whatever it might be. But I actually want to invite you to close your eyes for a moment. You can find a comfortable position in your chair. If you don't want to close your eyes, you can just look down, away from your screen for a moment. And just feel your physical body. Just notice the space that you're in, any sounds or sensations or even thoughts. Rather than thinking of them as distractions, they're just part of the environment, part of the background. And a lot of you shared a moment ago what brought you to this gathering. What had you choose of all the things you could do to spend your time today? I want to attend a workshop about these topics. And I invite you to consider that you being here says something about what is important to you. We spend a third of our lives at work and a third of them asleep. So if we want to live fully, really our workplace needs to be a place where we can express our values, what's important to us, to have a sense of purpose. So I invite us to all consider that doing this work will bring a new level of meaning and a new level of purpose to what we're doing. And that is the antidote to the hopelessness I know I can sometimes feel when I look on the news and I see what's going on in our world. I see the level of injustice. So just take a nice exhale, a nice inhale deeply in, and an exhale. Just want to take a moment to honor all of the people who came before us, all of our ancestors and all of those whom we have spent life with, whom have left the world, the beauty and the challenges that we are inheriting to us. Let what we talk about and do today be a continuation and a beautification of our world and of our lives. So with that, you can wiggle your fingers and toes, and maybe even give yourself a nice stretch. Prepare yourself to learn some new things today. Just get a little comfy. All right. Hi, everyone. And you don't have to put your camera on. We don't have to see your faces, but if you did, I wouldn't mind. I love seeing you. There we go. Hey, everyone. That's that like post-meditation bliss. I can see it on your faces. So we're going to talk a little bit right now about this Jedi framework. And as Brad said, we are really learning how to identify what we're going for, because we know that our brains can be very, very good at looking at what we want to avoid. So I'm going to be sharing with you a framework, a set of principles and practices that we've developed at Holistic Underground after a long history of working with and being burnt out activists and healthcare workers and healers, and you know how it is, you want to save the world and you keep burning out. So we really created this because it creates a pathway for us to sustainably and effectively cultivate these principles within our lives and within our organization. So as I'm going through these principles, these 4 principles with you today, and the practices that follow, I want you to not just receive what I'm sharing with you as concepts. These are not concepts. These are principles that you are invited to put into practice. We're going to give you some step-by-step, things you can do. It's not linear. I'm not going to act like it's all simple and you just follow the manual and now you have justice. No, that's not how it works. But these will give you a place to start and give you a frame so you can get your creativity in the game with us today. So think about your organizations, think about your teams, think about the context, the clients, the patients that you serve. And we're going to give you a chance to do some journaling, to do some conversation, to look at how to apply what we share with you directly. All right. Are we down to get into this together, y'all? All right. If you don't have a little notebook or note app out, you might grab one now as we share the principles and practices of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Yeehaw. So beginning with justice. Justice as a principle and the practices that I'll share with you now. We are defining justice as a state of integrity and wholeness, achieved through healing or transformation. This is a very unique definition of justice. It's different than what you think about when you think about prisons and guns and arresting people, right? This is a very different aim. A state of integrity and wholeness. Doing what we say we'll do. Being who we claim we are. Justice is a form of social integrity. Because when we say, hey, this is the land of the free and the home of the brave, right? But that's not what we see on TV. What do you experience? Think about your own life. When you see injustice happening, how do you feel? Right? You feel unsafe, you feel uncared for, you're like, that could be me. And it's even more so for communities that have been oppressed historically. They see people who look like them being treated unjustly. And it's like, how do I know that this is a space that actually cares about me? So when our bodies, minds, relationships, our institutions are functioning healthfully and effectively, doing what they say that will do, meaning a justice system actually creates justice. The healthcare system is caring about everyone's health, right? That is justice. And when all people health is being cared for in an equitable way, that's justice. It's not this far away thing. It's very, very directly applicable to what we are doing. Healing and transformation. We don't often think about healing when we think about justice, but really, when conflict, hurt, or harm occurs in our bodies, in our minds, in our institutions, justice means we clean up the mess. And when that's not possible, we need to address the underlying causes of harm. Because once again, think about your own life. When you see injustice happen, you see someone is hurt, but then we show up and we clean it up. We handle it. How does that make you feel? Right? There's that natural exhale, like, okay, I can trust that my life, my body, my needs matter, right? I think that's one of the reasons why the slogan Black Lives Matter was so powerful, because when we say that someone matters, it means that if something happens to you, we're going to take care of you. We as a society, we as a team, we as an organization, we don't let injustice, we don't let hurt, conflict, harm just get swept under the rug. We're going to pause. We're going to take the time to address the anything that is a lack of integrity. So there are many approaches to justice, like punitive justice, which says let's use punishment to deter people from doing bad things. Like if you broke my window, you're going to go to jail or pay a fine. But there's also restorative justice, looking at repairing the damage and taking responsibility, being response-able. So what would it look like to do a different paradigm? Instead of punishment, restoration. Break my window, fix it. Or transformative justice, addressing the root causes. Okay, you broke my window, let's make sure that my window gets repaired, and also Why were you so hungry that you needed to break my window to steal food in the first place? To say maybe the original conditions were not just to begin with. Transformative justice is going to be more time intensive, but it is definitely more thorough. So we're going to provide you right now that we've shared this example or this definition of justice. I'm going to give you some steps that you might take, and then we're going to give you a chance to journal and think about how might you apply this in your org. Stepping toward justice. The first thing to do is to acknowledge the harm, conflict, mess, and the experience of those affected. Have you ever been in a room and something happened, someone said something, and someone's feelings were hurt and no one said anything about it, and it's just awkward? It's just like the whole room's energy is just kind of off from that point on. Yeah. Acknowledgement is a very essential thing to create a sense of integrity in a group. Sometimes that will handle it. Be like, all right, thank you for owning your mistake. Just don't do it again. Acknowledging where you are response able, looking at your side of the street, seeing where you have agency. And that means everyone involved is acknowledging and owning their power. How are we going to change things if we are not owning our agency, owning where we do have power? We can't affect or control other people's actions, but we can look at our side of the street. And this gives us the ability to then go and say, okay, what is a vision for justice that we have? Create a vision for restoring or increasing the integrity of our group, of our organization, of our team. Because I know my side of the street, I know what I have, what I can affect. I know where other people can affect as well. Cleaning up your side of the street and supporting others to clean up theirs in that order. Have you ever had someone try to tell you to clean up your side of the street before they cleaned up their side of the street? What was your first reaction? Excuse me? Right? You want me to do what? What about all of that? So if we really want to be cultivating justice, what works, and trust me, I've tried, is starting with your side of the street so you can be someone with clear vision, with a clear street, who can talk to the others. And finally, examining the underlying conditions that resulted in that injustice to reduce it from happening again. So Raquel is going to share with you a brief story that demonstrates injustice, justice, and this principle in action.
Hi, everyone. I'm Raquel Nahara with Holistic Underground. So I don't know about you, but have you ever wanted to experience justice, but you saw that maybe you acted in a way that didn't actually align with your values? I know I have, and I'd like to share an example. So my stepdad is a lifelong Republican who's been a Fox News follower for a couple of decades. And for a lot of my life, I would get really angry with him and basically saw him as the epitome of white male racist. And so when we'd have conversations about politics or policy, I would leverage every single fact and statistic that I had, and I would systematically shame and shut him down. I would like you to guess how well that worked out. Not so much. One day I realized that he didn't have these conversations with my mom or my sisters or really most anyone else that we knew. And that's what I saw, that perhaps he was having these conversations with me, not because he liked to argue or he wanted to just piss me off, but because he really respected me and my ideas and my opinions. And I know this man. He might be cranky, he might be a curmudgeon, but he's also of deep service to his community. He donates money, volunteers regularly, checks on our neighbors just to make sure whether or not they're having a hard time getting out and about. This man's 80. And so I saw that his personal values were absolutely contrary to what Fox News was all about. And moreover, I saw that I had been showing up for these conversations in a way that might not actually serve justice. Because seriously, y'all, we as human beings, we seek acceptance. We seek community. So if I and others like me are constantly rejecting him, there are groups of folks who are advocating for policies and programs that harm communities that I love, and those folks would be more than happy to embrace him. And so I found that to be a bit of a perspective shift. And so as part of stepping towards justice, I acknowledged that I wasn't showing up for justice. I was actually causing additional harm because I was pushing him towards a community that wanted to creating harm. So then each time I would visit my family and he'd start to ask questions again or share articles, I reminded myself that he had a desire for a better world. And I began to respond to him with curiosity, respect, love. And we started having deeper and deeper conversations. And as we did, I was able to clean up this mess that I had made in my family, in my community, and build a deeper and stronger relationship with him. So you got to imagine my heart was just complete melty when he told me that he was absolutely not going to vote for Trump in our last election. And so when I think about my dad, I think about the words of Dr. Cornel West. Never forget that justice is what love looks like in public.
Thank you so much, Raquel. I really appreciate you sharing, a personal story of realizing when, even though we might care about justice, if we're not thinking about the end and what actually justice would look like, we can unintentionally be perpetuating that which we're trying to avoid. So I want all of you to take a moment right now, pull out a piece of paper and pen, and I'm going to share with you 2 brief reflection questions. The first is, how might this principle, as we've shared it to you, apply to your organization? How might this idea of creating, restoring integrity and wholeness through healing and transformation, cleaning up the mess, making systems that are more integrous? And what's one way your org could benefit from practicing this principle? So take a minute right now, just reflect on this, and then you'll get a chance to be in a breakout room shortly. Another few moments, just some ideas. How could we apply this principle? What might it look like? Great. So you can keep writing, and I'm just going to explain our breakout rooms. What we're going to do is the person with the longer hair is going to go first. If your video is off, you can just go ahead and chat in how many inches your hair is. This just makes that little debate at the beginning a little bit easier. And you're just going to share what you're seeing about how you could apply this principle. So we're going to put you into breakout rooms. Does anyone have any questions? Please put them in the chat before we begin. All right, then. Let's break them out. All right. The party has returned. Okay. So let's hear from a couple of you. So, everyone is welcome to use the chat and share what are you seeing, what ideas might you have for your organization, and we can hear from a few people. What are you seeing as far as how you might bring this into your organization? And you can go ahead and just come off mute, the brave soul who will share with us.
Actually, I think folks can't unmute themselves, Maz.
They could raise their hand with a reaction.
There you go. Thank you so much. So if you hit the little smiley button, you're all here like, I want to share. Yeah, go ahead and share in the chat in the meantime. And anyone who would like to come off mute, hit the reaction button and raise your hand. We will welcome you. There we go. Amy has raised her hand.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Thank you. So, you know, I really was very pleased to hear your discussion around justice. And a lot of us talk about DEI and they don't talk about the justice aspect. For us, you know, being who you say you are, doing what you say you're going to do, those are principles that we aspire to. But getting to those underlying causes is really challenging. During COVID, you know, one example, we're a large healthcare foundation, National Healthcare Foundation, and there were so many injustices and a lot of unique things started just during the pandemic. But one example was older adults who were homebound were really left out of vaccinations. You know, even in nursing homes at the beginning of it, there was the notion that people in nursing homes would somehow go to the pharmacies that were going to be delivering the vaccines. But the homebound who may not have had home health care, who may have been, you know, living with family or living alone in communities who couldn't get out of the house, they were not part of anybody's plan. They were just left. And you know, in particular, communities of color, no transportation, you know, just there was no plan. And so we funded bringing together Trust for America's Health, one of the big public health gurus, along with the White House vaccine czar under Biden, to really think through with national leaders and home-based primary care, how, you know, what it might look like if we were to begin delivering that, and a plan was put into place.
I love what you're sharing, Amy. You know, I just want to highlight something you're saying, which is we can't always keep every promise we make, right? It's not possible to do every single thing that you say you will do every single time. And I'm just so glad you brought that up, because I don't want anyone here to think that justice means being perfect. But what it does mean is that, just like the perfect example you gave here, I think it's a great example, is when a mess occurs, can we own it and can we clean it up? Right. I think what you just shared is such a great example of there was no plan. That was an injustice. And when that was recognized, you know, these organizations that you're partnering with took action to clean it up. So I just really, really thank you for bringing that example forward. Yeah. So we're going to move on to the next principle. Please continue sharing in the chat. I love these different examples of what you've discussed. And thank you again, Amy, and please, all of you, as every single time, we'll hear from one or two people. And the slides should now be working much better. Okay, principle number 2, equity. And we are talking about social equity. We're not talking about shares in a company, though you might start sharing those shares and that would be kind of equitable. Equity as a principle in practice. Measurable resources are distributed in a way that provides everyone with what they need to thrive. Very, very straightforward definition of equity. Measurable resources distributed in a way that provides everyone with what they need to thrive. Now, by thrive, we don't mean everyone has a yacht, and we don't mean everyone is a millionaire. What we mean is people have the opportunity to grow well. Like a plant, you know, they're not withering, they're not wilting, they can grow, they can live a life, they can have, you know, basic human decency. So when we talk about measurable resources, so to thrive, to grow or to develop well, to prosper or flourish. And it really does not take that much. People with so little can really live such meaningful lives, but even that is not often distributed. So measurable resources, we're talking about access. Who has access to certain opportunities? Ownership, right? When you are an owner of something or you have ownership, you have certain rights, certain abilities to shape outcomes. Power, who is given the power to make certain decisions and has the ability to take certain actions. Support. We often don't think about equity being in the form of support. Can we just give people extra support so that they can achieve whatever it is that they need? Capital, wealth, and more. So you may have seen this image before, the distinction between equality and equity. Equality means everyone gets the same. But as you can see from this drawing, people don't have the same needs. So giving everyone a t-shirt doesn't mean it's going to fit everyone. Equity means that we are actually seeing what each person needs and seeing when some people have enough and distributing the resources we have accordingly. So an example of cultivating equity. You have to start by really understanding what each person or group needs to thrive. Step one. This can be done through surveys, this can be done through conversations, this can be done through many, many different things, even just learning and looking at larger data sets. You can start to see, right, okay, the groups that are lacking XYZ resources, these are the outcomes that they have. And it is important to examine how current and historical distribution of resources affect who can and cannot thrive today, right? The example that was given by Amy was a really good one, because if you were not aware of how race or class might affect transportation access, you might not be aware of the picture when it came to vaccine access, right? There are ways in which historical distribution will then affect the current equity. Looking at this larger picture, we want to start by resourcing those who have the greatest need. I add this as a step because sometimes the very conversation of where do we begin, who goes first, can take up so much of the time and resource. So starting with who has the greatest need. 4, invite those who have the most to share, to be generous. An abundance mindset is actually really important when we want to practice equity. Being able to recognize that sharing and being generous is a beautiful thing. And finally, revising resource distribution systems and practices to maximize equity with the aim of system-wide thriving. This can be from hiring practices to compensation. This can look at who has access to certain services within an organization or on your team. There are so many ways that we can start to look at these measurable resources and see how might we distribute them in a way where everyone has the ability to thrive. So let's take a moment now to do some journaling. But before we do, actually, I do want to share a brief example so you have a little bit of a sense of what I'm talking about. At Holistic Underground, we, of course, pride ourselves on being a justice, equity, diversity group, and we love justice and all this stuff, right? And the reason we know what we're talking about is really more because of how many mistakes we've made than it is because of how perfect we are, right? This is the kind of work where you learn by making a mess and cleaning it up again and again. So let me share a mess that I made. We have these meetings, and a certain member of the team, who just so happened to be the founder, sometimes would end up taking up pretty much the entire meeting, talking most of the time. And that certain person was me. Okay, that was me. Raise your hand if you've ever been at a meeting and one guy, usually a guy, is talking the entire time, or like 80% of the time. Yeah. So raise your hand if it's you. I'm just teasing. We're not gonna, this is not Dr. Phil. So this was a thing, people kept bringing it to my attention. I'll be honest, it did not really register for a while until eventually one of my teammates was like, yo, this is really affecting my experience. And I feel like I'm not getting the leadership development that we talked about, being a part of my role. And I was like, dang, I'm not keeping my promise. We need to address this. So after iteration, we found a new way of leading our meetings. And this is something that we've now shared with dozens of organizations in various countries. We have 4 different roles to every meeting, and they rotate every meeting. The first person is the facilitator. This person may or may not do most of the talking, but they're the one who guides us through the agenda. They pass the mic to the person who is leading a certain agenda item, take the mic back, pass it again. So even I, as the founder or whatever of the company, I need to wait my turn. And when my time is up, that turn is over, just like everyone else. The timekeeper, of course, supports that facilitator with an actual clock, a stopwatch, so that the resource, a measurable resource called time, is shared equitably. The vibe keeper. We found after a while that someone needs to be just checking, when we talked about justice and injustice, that sense of integrity. Sometimes the group needs a pause. Sometimes the group needs to take a deep breath. Sometimes we need to, circle back and say, hey, Raquel, hey, Brad, hey, Dara, did you feel heard in what you just said? Because it seems like we kind of steamrolled through what you were talking about. And the note keeper, who's actually taking the notes. And this rotates. So even the leader of the company, the leader of the meeting takes notes some days. And, I know that some people have seen that the note-taking role usually is held by the same person. That person is usually a female or a woman. There's a lot of expectations and assumptions about, certain roles. So this was a practice that we started doing to create some more equity in how our meetings run. We share this example because it's something small, something simple. We're not saying you need to go into the, bank account and start, making it rain on everyone as a first step. But there are ways to look at resources and sharing them even in how you interact. So take a moment right now, pull out your journals, and I want you to think about what might be a way for you and your organization to practice or apply this principle. And we've just shared in the chat the definition of the principle one more time, so you have access to it. Measurable resources distributed in a way that provides everyone with what they need to thrive. I love what just was shared by Kate. Thank you. Yep. So in a moment, we will be putting you back into breakout rooms. In the off chance that anything happens with the breakout rooms and you find yourself all alone, don't worry, we're still with you. Hold us in your hearts. Just keep journaling. But we will do our best to make sure that everyone, sometimes someone is late to enter the room and we'll move you around. But let us go ahead and break them out.
All right.
Do the thing.
A little bit. The thing.
Who would like to share with us what they share, what came up for them in their breakout? Please, everyone share in the chat, and one person can come off mute. Or raise your hand and we will take you off. Opportunities are everywhere, Cal says. Yes. When we know what equity, when we have a definition, we can start to actually get creative, not just respond to the fire when someone is like, that's not equitable. Okay, let me deal with that. Well, what if you didn't wait until there was a crisis? Rebecca has raised her hand, their hand. Let us bring them up.
Okay.
Please, Rebecca.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I thought this is a very mind-opening conversation we're having, and I truly appreciate it. One of the things that we were talking about is that I think of the terms that we're discussing, this is one that I don't think a lot of people are on the same page with. And I think that's the place to start, is getting people to open up and talk about it, because everybody sees this term very differently. They interpret what they have very differently. Some people may feel that they have that things are equal. Another one may say no. And yeah. So the definition, the talking about it, the getting people to take a look at it like we are here, I think is the place that we have to start. I represent the American Holistic Nursing Association, and my mind is sort of going because we have I can see a lot of places where we can get this discussion going, and not telling people what it is, but getting them to open up and come together.
There you go. Yep. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And what you just said at the end there is really the heart of it, right? You've done our job for us, which is taking off the Band-Aid. It's not necessarily easy, y'all. Equity is definitely going to be it's a work in progress always. And we're going to, at the end, hopefully have a second to talk to you about high quality mistakes, right? Where we are learning as we go. But having the conversation, not assuming, but asking what people need to thrive, that I think is a great place to start. And it takes courage because we're often afraid to have the conversation. Afraid to talk about money. All right, come on, let's just say the M word, okay? We're afraid to talk about money, resources, who's getting access to what, right? And just having the conversation is a great place to begin. So I want to see a little more in the chat, y'all. I want to, SB McGuire just shared some, but I want to hear from more of you in this chat space. So please, let's get it popping in the chat a little bit, okay? Even as I'm going, if you just want to be like, I like that, give us some energy. So let us move into our next principle, diversity. Diversity, the welcomed presence of differences within a group. Specifically, when differences create richness and don't block connection. Because in America, once upon a time, we did something called integration. And I wasn't around, believe it or not, but what I've heard is that for some people, this happened faster than the society was ready for. And it might have actually, for some people, created some trauma, particularly Black people, people of color, because they were put into a group that wasn't ready to treat them as human beings, right? So diversity, what we're looking at is not just putting everyone together. If we're living in a city and it's very diverse, but all the white people live in a gated community and all the people of color live in the ghetto and all of the other people live over there, is that really diversity? Not really, that's segregation. So true diversity is a remedy to segregation. And I'll show you what I mean using something called the pyramid of violence. This is something I learned from the Mosaic Project when I was a camp counselor long ago, but as you can see, it has really affected me. At the base of the pyramid of violence is segregation. When we're all in the same place, sharing resources, if anything, sharing a planet, but we act like we're not. You know what I mean? Like all the people we walk by on the street and never talk to, right? They're just kind of separate from us. And segregation breeds ignorance and bias. Because you're seeing these people maybe on the TV, you're seeing the movies, and usually it's a lot of stereotypes about who these folks are, but you're never actually connecting with these folks. The statistics on how many interracial friendships exist and cross-gender or friendships between people of different genders are very, very sad. So of course, there's going to be a lot of ignorance about other people. And that will breed prejudice. Because if you don't know nobody from that community or group, then all you're going to know about them is the stereotypes and the stories that you hear that are usually not going to be very good. And prejudice will inevitably lead to discrimination. Because now we're treating people based off of the stories that we have been told about them, not off of real human interactions with other people. And that will eventually normalize and even justify violence. So the work of diversity is not just to create a photo that has a lot of people of color, or to, try to make be hip with the new trend of having, diverse organizations or teams. We're actually healing our country. We're actually healing a very, very big wound in our society. Something that we've inherited from our ancestors. We were all born into a very segregated world. So let's talk a little bit about the steps that we might take to begin this work of healing, this work of bringing ourselves back together and restoring that wholeness. One, we must acknowledge the reality and impacts of segregation and embracing the benefits of active welcoming and connecting for diversity, welcoming and connecting, right? We are not just being like, oh, well, this is who's here, and it's just a matter of chance. You know, this is just who saw the event invite. This is just who saw the job listing. No. Even the algorithms on the internet are racially, gender, ability biased, right? So it's like racism and sexism and these things are all built into the system. You know what I mean? So we're not just passively, we're actively welcoming people. We're actively saying, okay, if we don't do something, we're just going to perpetuate a segregated reality. If we just go with the status quo, we're going to perpetuate segregation. Search for segregation and exclusion that we didn't even notice because it's so normalized. When we were throwing more events at Holistic Underground in person, you know, a few years ago, we did some kind of a holistic health events. It was a year into an event that we didn't even realize that we were in a space that was not accessible to anyone in a wheelchair because you had to take the stairs to get to the location. And it wasn't until, you know, we had someone come to another one of our events and I wanted to invite them to this event and they're like, is it wheelchair accessible? And my heart broke. I was like, I didn't even think about that. So this is because I've barely known anyone in a wheelchair. And I mean, not to say that this justifies or makes it okay, but it's like my brain is not trained to think about that because of the segregation of our society, the segregation of people based off of ability. So we have to recognize we have these biases and need to go out of our way to see where are we missing something? Where are our gaps in awareness? Clarifying the form of diversity you want to focus on first. Because really, I've tried to get ability, gender, class, age, race, diversity, all for the next event. Let's go, right? And it's hard. You're gonna miss something, right? Sometimes it is important to take things in small, sweet steps. So for that particular event, we started with ability and age. We said those are the two metrics of diversity we're going to start with. That doesn't mean they're more important than the others. We just have to pick somewhere to begin, and that was where we were lacking the most. Started to track according to those metrics. Examine how historical and institutional oppression and privilege, a lot of words there, historical and institutional, meaning historical, this has been happening for a long time. Things like, you know, America's relationship with gender and race, and institutional, things that are not just in the relationships between us, but like the algorithms and like certain laws and policies, they're built into the system. How those things affect who is and isn't welcomed. Because once upon a time, it was illegal for Black people to apply to own a home or get certain loans when there was a movement in the United States to create more homeowners. That's not currently a law, but there are still institutional and historical practices or policies that continue to perpetuate that outcome. Does that make sense? Yes, we have laws that say it's illegal to discriminate based off of certain things, but there are still certain things that we need to examine how they're affecting who is welcome. Sometimes it's just the language of the brand. And finally, seeking guidance. I do highly recommend that when we are engaging in this work, we are, talking to people who know about and are part of and are from the community that we want to welcome and connect with. Not to tokenize them, but to, as you would any expert, right? Hire someone and have a reciprocal and equitable interaction where they are supporting you to understand, okay, how is the language? How we're presenting ourselves? How is the advertising and the marketing? How might these things be shaping who feels welcome and who doesn't? When they see the invitation, do they think, oh, that's for me? Or do they think, oh, that's not for me? We had to even do this with our own events. We used to have events, one of these holistic health events, and it would say like yoga and da-da-da-da-da. And we had to think about, well, what is the current kind of brand in our society about yoga, right? yes, yoga comes from Southeast Asia, but do people of color traditionally associate themselves with yoga in the United States? Maybe not, right? So we started to think about, okay, how can we present this in a way where it's like, okay, we need to start changing. Okay, we're going to have different activities. We're going to have different ways of making this invitation. So this is stepping towards diversity, the steps that we can have you take. The example I gave was an event that we were hosting. We found that we weren't having the kind of diversity that we wanted. So we picked one measure of, or two measures, it was ability and age. And we started to, one, address the blockers to that, meaning we changed our location so that it had a wheelchair accessibility. And we started to look at how we were marketing it, who we were inviting, and saying, what do we need to do to increase the diversity of different abilities and people of different ages at our event? We're going to offer you one more example from Reimagine. Please.
Great. Thanks, Mazen. And if you do want to pull up the slide at any point, that would be great. So hi, everyone. I am Dara Kotzberg. I am the program director at Reimagine and very excited to be with you all today. The story I'm going to share is about what we learned actually during the pandemic. So from its inception, Reimagine has been very intentional about cultivating diversity and trying to meet people where they are in respect to conversations around end of life. And the way we do this is both through gateways like art, spirituality, and medicine, but we also meet people where they are in their physical locations. So for example, in our in-person festivals, we focus most of our outreach efforts in reaching out to underrepresented communities and inviting them to host events in their own local community centers, places of worship, et cetera, and offering small grants to support their events. And we found this to be very effective in bringing people of different backgrounds into the conversation. However, when the pandemic struck and we had to shift to creating supportive online spaces, we noticed that in the digital realm, the diversity of our events decreased pretty dramatically. And that although we had collaborators and speakers of color, the online audiences were mostly white. And with that in mind, and in the wake of George Floyd's murder, we partnered with Holistic Underground to help us think through how we could more deeply apply a Jedi lens in our effort to cultivate a broad cultural shift around social justice and end of life. And one of the first things we did was host a listening session for our collaborators from underrepresented communities. And Brad and I weren't invited to attend. It was only for our staff members of color, Mazen and Raquel, and the people of color in our community. So the forum was designed in a way that they could really share what was on their minds. And what we learned is that, yes, our community was excited that there were events and experiences for online for everyone to attend. And they liked the intention of bringing people of different backgrounds together. But they also voiced that they needed their own spaces with their own communities to explore what it means to live and die well. And with that feedback, we empowered and supported members of underrepresented communities to begin hosting experiences that we call table talks that are buy-in for them and their individual communities. And where allies from other communities can attend, but just listen. And not only did our collaborators report back that they started feeling they were truly centered in this online work, but now our team had the opportunity to learn from each of these groups around what mattered most to individual communities with respect to serious illness, death, grief, and healthcare. And thinking about diversity in a new way and having the chance to listen and learn has truly shaped so much of our work, including the session here today and what we plan to continue to do with Holistic Underground. And this slide, which you may have been looking at, is just to just show the progression of how our work has really deepened around this over time. So that's it, Mazen.
Thank you, Dara. Yes, I love this example because it's counterintuitive to think that sometimes to create more diversity, we need to create spaces that are exclusive, not exclusionary, but exclusive to certain communities, to be able to be like, well, what do we need to be able to feel safe now integrating? Because the reality is, acknowledging the reality of segregation, we're not starting from neutral. We're starting from a long history that needs to be acknowledged, addressed, and then we can come together and do that healing work. So once again, please pull out your journals. We are going to do some journaling right now. And we want to look at how might this principle apply to your example. I'm just going to give you a minute right now to look at that question. And we will put in the chat the definition of diversity that we have. So once again, you all know the deal at this point, how we're going to do it. Going to get into the breakout room, share. The person with the longer hair can go first. And Raquel, would you please break them out?
With joy. We'll see you all very soon.
Welcome back.
And so
All, I don't know about you all, but I just have the sense that that conversation could have kept going for a while. So let this be the beginning of you all as, you know, practitioners in this field, really being a community of practice, right? Because you're not alone. And sometimes talking to people from that other organization over there, it's actually a little easier because your job's not on the line. So hint, hint. So we're going to move right into our last principle because we want to make sure that we can give you all some time for the breakout for this one as well. And Roxanne asked, is there a way we can stay connected? That is definitely a CTAC question, but I know that's what CTAC is all about. So we're actually going to, at the end of this, we're going to drop a link that will have a little feedback form. And in that, you can actually ask and make requests of something, like you're like, oh, like, we want to find a way to stay connected. If you have ideas for future things that we could do like this, you can let us know what you would like. So if staying connected is one of them, please fill out that feedback form. Like how I did that? So smooth. All right. Our last principle here is inclusion. And like the others, my friends, I have designed this principle specifically for it to be actionable. And so let's get right into it. Inclusion as principle and practice. Producing a context in which, one, everyone present has the opportunity to make a meaningful and valued contribution. Think about it. Inclusion is not just about people being in the room. It's about what they get to do. Do they get to participate? Are they really doing something, or are they just breathing air? Two, everyone present is supported to experience a sense of belonging to the group. There's two aspects to inclusion, y'all. Participation, or even a sense of purpose, and a sense of belonging. Participation. We all have heard of the term token. The token black guy, the token woman, right? The person who's kind of put in the room to make it look like inclusion. But it's the meaningful and valued contribution that lets people feel a sense of purpose. Think about it for yourself. Have you ever gone to a party that was a potluck and you brought a dish and everyone loved it? Right, raise your hand. If you ever brought that salad and everyone's like, oh my God, they brought that salad. Do you not feel so included? You're like, I brought the salad. Everyone knows me, you know, I'm this person who brought the salad. Because as humans, believe it or not, we're actually not that selfish. Deep down, we want to contribute. We want to know that when we die, we mattered. We will be remembered. And it is from the opportunity to make a contribution that we get a sense of purpose. So inclusion is very much about giving people a role. When I throw a party and there is a new person who has never been to the parties before, The first thing I do when they arrive is I'm like, hey, can you help me with this? Oh, can you carry this over there? I give them things to do. And it's a small little application of this principle because they're like, yep, I have a role. I'm important. I matter. I'm welcome here. A sense of belonging. Feeling like you're part of the group. Who you are as you are is valued and needed. You are in the right place. You fit. This is just the definition of belonging put into a sentence or a few sentences. Belonging, in the sense of belonging, inclusion this way, is all about people being able to be human, being able to be their real selves, which Brad is going to give us an example of in a moment. How can you create a context in which people can really show up fully? Please, Brad.
Mazen, yes, it's just to say that in this pandemic, when we think about being who we are and showing up to work, when we all experience so much loss, there's so much loss in our that we experience, our colleagues experience. But if we're keeping that bottled up and we don't share that with each other, how can we really show up fully for one another? And so at Reimagine, we've been hosting a monthly vigil just for the public to show up every month online, where we light a candle and we share not only the names of those we've lost, but other things that we may have lost over the past month. And it's been really powerful to see what's come out of that. And now, for example, an organization in Michigan is bringing us in to train the organization on how can that organization who is experiencing loss on a regular basis, as we all are, how can we train them to host vigils for their own workplace on a monthly basis, that they can then process all the losses, the failures, all these things that come up in the workplace that are real, but are so often unacknowledged. And because they're unacknowledged, we're less inclusive and connected.
Beautifully said, Brad. So that is an example of creating an opportunity for people to be human, right? People know that they're welcome when their full humanity is present. And an activity like that, talking about the end of life, death, loss, that brings us together. That transcends all of the ways that we have been segregated. So that is a great example. And here are the steps that we have for stepping towards inclusion. You will get these slides for yourself to be able to review. 1, discover who does and does not have the opportunity to participate. Discover who does and does not feel like they belong. This can be done through various surveys. We've actually created a system called the inclusivity factor. So we've created a set of questions that allows us to determine a sense of participation and meaning, a sense of belonging. Create opportunities for those excluded to participate in and benefit from what's going on. It has to be both. You're not just giving them a role that serves you. You're giving them a role that gives them a sense of meaning and purpose, and that allows them to actually benefit from what's going on. And finally, address the blockers to belonging. What Brad just shared is an example of building psychological safety, right? You can talk about death here. You can talk about loss. You don't need to be, buttoned up corporate Mr. Perfect, Mrs. Perfect. You know what I'm talking about, right? The like, you go home and your gut hurts because you've been clenching your, organs the whole day trying to act like you have no humanity. That is such a huge blocker to inclusion. And other practices are things that help people feel a sense of purpose. Like you're saying, you're acknowledging their work. You are really saying, hey, you are making a contribution here. You are making a difference. So with that, we have our 4 principles: justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Can you believe that all this time has passed since we began? Time flies, huh? So we have enough room right now to take a couple of questions in the chat. And if we have, the opportunity to respond to a few of them, and then we're going to close out our time together. Focusing on inclusion, you bring your organization closer to justice, equity, and diversity. Lisa, it's true. If you can start to build inclusion, you're going to create the kind of environment where the conversations about justice are possible, where the work of equity is possible. I think that starting with justice can often be a good thing to do, because when we have that sense of integrity, it kind of builds a sense of trust for us to then, equity and inclusion and these things, but it's not linear. You kind of can start at any point there. It's holographic, one might say. It's like in each one of them is all of the others. Julie, if you could add your question to the chat, that would be great. I came late, you addressed, how can we achieve representation without committing tokenism? Yep. So the key distinction between, it's not, I have a 30-second answer for you, and it's a much deeper question, right? But reciprocity is a really, really important question if you're worried about tokenism, right? Because if I am a representative of my community and I have clout in my community, and if people see that I'm attending an event or I'm part of a team and they say, wow, he's on that team, maybe they would welcome me too, right? That's not nothing. That is valuable. That is valuable, and I should be reciprocated for that value, right? I should be compensated for that value in some way. And it's all transparent. It's not like, hey, just come to this party and secretly, we need you to make us look cool. It's like, hey, you are a member of this community. You know a lot of people in that community. You might be able to, and we're going to hire you. We're going to reciprocate in some way. We're going to give you some kind of exchange. And I'm fully consenting to saying, yes, I'm here not as a token, but as an ambassador. I'm here to bridge a historical divide between my community and yours of segregation and of racism or whatever it might be that existed before I was even born. So it's very different than tokenism in that sense. Integrate someone new to a team that already has a lot of psychological safety. It takes time, but just keep those practices up. So we are at our time. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put the feedback form in the chat. If you ask us questions, we are definitely going to respond to you. We want to be in a relationship with you. We want to support your organizations. We want to continue to be bringing together this kind of convening. So please grab that link. We will email it to you as well, but we would love it if you could just fill it out at some point today. And to wrap up our time together, why don't we all just jump off of mute and give a nice cacophony of goodbyes, because we all know we love that sound of everyone on Zoom. Can we de-block the mute, Dara?
Oh, and Mazen, what we like to do is if everyone just says the word love simultaneously, it actually sounds good. It actually doesn't sound
let's
horrible.
do it. Let's do it. All right, 1, 2, 3. Love. Yes. Wonderful.
Thank you,
thank you all
everyone.
so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Designing with the end in mind.
Bye.
The real end.
Thank you.
Shout out to CTAC.
Thank you so much, Luke.
Oh, thank you all. This was such a great discussion. I loved the breakouts. Just being able to connect with members and in chat. It was a great discussion. So.